Lately, I have been frustrated with my reading habits. My reading habits haven't changed too dramatically since I started this YouTube channel just over a month ago, but the way that my mental process approaches reading has changed. And so I've decided that it's time to reassess my habits, reassess my mental process. And so I've left the bookshelves behind and I've come out to the lake today to talk about my reading habits and maybe to come up with a new plan. Now, firstly, I want to say that I understand that being frustrated with my reading habits is a first world problem. This is not a crisis, but it is important because reading is a coping mechanism for stress and for anxiety, and I cannot allow stress and anxiety to be a product of the thing that I use to relieve stress and anxiety. I can't allow that to happen. Reading is the thing that I turn to when I need comfort. And secondly, I want to say that by the time this video comes out, Major League Baseball will have started up again in America, and it is the most wonderful time of the year. So I'm out here repping my team. So anyway, what are my reading habits? First of all, I tend to read too many books at once. Between the audiobooks that I have on my phone and on CD in the car, I still have a CD player in my car, and the ebooks on my phone and on my iPad, the physical books on my shelf, the stuff that I own, the stuff that I borrow from the library, loaners I get from friends. You know, I get books from all sorts of sources, and every time I get a new book in, I start reading it. I can't wait. You know, so I feel like I can manage one more book. I can put one more book on there. What's the difference between reading 6 books and reading 7 books? Add to that, I have a TBR that is completely lunatic. It is over 780 books long. Every time I hear of a book that sounds good, I add it to the list. But once it's on the list, I almost never read it because I feel like, well, it's there now, I'll remember it. I can read it anytime. And so something else comes along and it just preempts whatever's already on the list. So, so a lot of the time, the stuff that's on the TBR never gets read. Add to that, I have all these trackers. I have an Excel spreadsheet, I have a reading log, I use Scrivener to write in a reading diary, online trackers with the library for the books that I read. I use Goodreads, of course. There's other apps that have tried to get my attention. So, like, I've got all these places that I keep books logged in, and I started using Notion to track books because now that I'm producing videos about the books that I'm reading, I need to track the workflow that I'm producing and stuff that's coming down the pipeline. There's just so much all the time to think about and to keep in my mind that it starts becoming very overwhelming. Now, by some people's standards, in 2019, I managed all this really well. I ended up reading 138 books. That's the most books I've ever read in a single year. But to be honest, I never want to read that many books again. And in fact, I really found myself doing it just to brag. You know, for once in my life, I found that there were people in my social circle who actually cared about what I was reading, or at least they said they did. And, you know, I go down to the coffee shop and have a coffee and a muffin, and they would ask me, you know, hey, Eric, like, how many books are you reading? How many have you read all year so far? And, you know, I would thrill to tell them, you know, I've read 70, I've read 80, I've read 90, I've read over 100 books this year. They would at least pretend to be impressed. You know, I would give my little mini book reports on these books and everything, but it was all very surface level. And what I never told them is that over half of those books were audiobooks. All of them listened to at 1.5 speed, and none of them better than half remembered. Reading over 100 books, which I've done in a couple other years, makes me feel crazy because I can't hardly remember a single thing that I read, but I've spent 1,000 hours reading, but I can't remember hardly anything that I've read. Now, if there's one thing I truly hate, it's when somebody brings up a book like Lucy Ellmann's Ducks Newburyport or Cervantes' Don Quixote, which 2 books that I read in 2021, and I'll be like, yeah, I read those, I loved them. But in point of fact, I listened to the audiobooks, and now just 2 years later, I can barely remember them. I mean, I can recount a basic plot summary, and not that there's much of a plot in Ducks Newburyport. There's about a whole short story's worth of plot in that book, and that's not really the point. But listening to the audiobook, especially of Ducks Newburyport, just went in one ear and out the other, and it was just a way to pass the hours. I want more out of the books that I read than just something to pass the hours. Books to me are not mindless entertainment. They mean more than that to me, and I legitimately enjoyed listening to Ducks Newburyport, and I really liked Don Quixote. I found that to be accessible and funnier than I ever thought it was going to be, but I can barely remember it now. There's stories within stories in Don Quixote, and I can barely remember what those are about. And I feel like had I read a physical copy of the book, slowed down, reread certain passages, maybe marked them, took notes while I was reading, even just brief notes. Remember the story about XYZ. And that's all that I would have to do. But I don't do that with audiobooks. And so my memory is very imperfect. I don't have a steel trap up here. But outside a surface level understanding of these books, as far as just plot summaries, and I don't absorb very much about the book. I don't retain the themes. I don't remember characters very well. It all just kind of fades away. If you've watched any of my book reviews on this channel, you'll notice that I don't tend to dwell on book summaries very much. Because for me personally, I find more value in character development, character arcs, the themes and the lessons to take from books. What was the purpose of the book? Why was it written in the first place? Now, I first started listening to audiobooks, I think in 2011. The first audiobook that I listened to was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. And I was just totally enchanted by the whole process. Actually, I cannot tell a lie. The very first audiobook that I ever listened to was the Old Testament as read by Sir Laurence Olivier. My mom had the entire Old Testament on cassette tape. She must have gotten that in the 80s, and I found it in the basement. I don't know why. I was a weird teenager, man. I thought it was funny to listen to the Old Testament instead of Pearl Jam and Aerosmith. Anyway, the first proper audiobook that I listened to in the modern era was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. And ever since then, the number of books that I've read every year has gone up. However, with the increase in reading totals, my actual reading comprehension, I've noticed, has started to decline. And not just with my physical books. So I've lost a little bit of the skills involved in reading physical books, but my ability to comprehend and concentrate on an audiobook has also declined over the years. I don't know why. I don't want to say that laziness begets laziness, because I don't think listening to an audiobook makes you lazy. And I'm not here to say that nobody should be listening to audiobooks. I'm not here to say that I'm never going to listen to an audiobook again. And I'm not even saying that audiobooks are the sole cause of all of the problems that I'm having. I'm just saying that at this stage of my life, right now, I am relying too heavily on audiobooks to get through my reading list. Well, there's a speedboat coming down the way. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully it's not too loud. I'm just going to talk over top of it. But anyway, recently I had to stop listening to 2 different audiobooks. One was Fen, Bog, and Swamp by Annie Proulx, and the other was Babel by R.F. Kuang. Am I saying that name right? I think I am. And it's not that these books are exceedingly complex. It's just that they are complex enough that I have to pay more attention than I'm capable of paying attention to an audiobook these days. My mind wanders way too much. Both of these books are so rich in detail that every little thing the narrator says in these books makes me think of a million other things. I don't think I'm actually ADHD, thank goodness, and I feel for people who are, but I really struggle with concentrating on audiobooks because the littlest detail in the book will set my imagination spiraling. So I went out and I borrowed a copy of Fen, Bog, and Swamp from my public library, and I've got that at the house right now. And I also own a physical copy of Babel. So I'm going to switch over and read that eventually, but I'm gonna have to clear a lot of other books off my plate before I get to that one. I am really trying not to load up too many physical books at once, but we'll get to that in a minute. Wow, look at that hair. It's probably time for a haircut pretty soon. So enjoy my bozo locks while I complete this segment. All right, so this actually brings me to my worst reading habit, which isn't listening to audiobooks, which isn't tracking my books. It's reading too many books at once, whether it's audiobooks or ebooks or physical books. It's just piling too many on. At one point last year, I was actually listening to 24 books at one time. By anybody's standards, that's completely idiotic. I think I only ended up actually finishing 8 of those books, and I had to lay the rest of them aside for a while. I'll probably come back and finish them at some point. I even made a special tracker for those books. Here it is. Look at this thing. This is a monstrosity. And it's complete with like a status for each book. The blue is how many pages I've currently read. This is totally insane. So right now, I think I'm currently reading 5 or 6 books, which is still more than I want to read. It's still enough to create a sense of anxiety. It's still, I don't even get to each one of these books every week. And at that point, I don't even feel like I'm reading them anymore. So in an effort to help me kind of manage my reading list, I've already mentioned that I've turned to Notion. But is that really helping? Now, in order to get one video out per week on my channel, I've, like I said, turned to Notion to help me schedule my workflow. Notion is not sponsoring this video, and they are not about to after they hear what I'm going to say about it. No, I don't hate Notion, and for a lot of people, I can definitely see how it can be a very effective tool. But for me, all it is a tool to set up unrealistic expectations for my time. I get overly ambitious and I schedule my ambitions in Notion, and when I inevitably don't live up to those ambitions, to those lofty goals that I set up well in advance, months in advance, my all or nothing thinking kicks in and I immediately think that I've failed. This isn't really Notion's problem. This is a me problem for sure. But Notion just isn't the tool that I need to use to keep track of anything in my life, because I just use it to self-destruct. Another problem I'm having adjusting to making these videos on this channel is that now every time I pick up a book, I start telling myself, what am I going to say on this channel? Don't mess this up. Instead of just, let's enjoy this book, Eric. Let's have fun with this book. And it's turned into, like I said before, a source of anxiety and stress. I just can't let that happen. And I need to be free not to produce a video on a book that I've read. Not every single book that I read is going to end up on this channel. If I read 50 or 100 books this year, I need to have the wiggle room and the freedom to pick and choose which books I talk about, especially since I don't want to get in the habit of doing negative book reviews. I mostly want to focus on the books that I enjoy reading. And unless I have a really good reason to talk about a book that I didn't like, I'm going to probably keep that off the channel, for the most part anyway. So if I haven't even read the book yet, how could I possibly schedule it for a future video? These are all pressures that I'm putting on myself. Nobody's doing this to me. This is all something that I'm doing to myself. And so this is something that I need to work on. And I'm sure a lot of us have experienced stuff like this, where we do it to ourselves. We make our own problems. Like a lot of avid bookworms, I have a lot of books at home. I'm not sure what the current count is. Last time I counted was about 600. It may be more, it may be less at this point. But a rough estimate told me that if I never read another book anywhere else except for my own bookshelves, all of the unread books that are currently sitting in my house on my shelves collecting dust will take me about 10 or 15 years to get through. And that's if I read at my current pace of 50 to 70 books a year. So obviously, I'm buying more books than I can read. And this is not a unique problem. A lot of people suffer from this. I watch book haul videos on YouTube, and by the way, you'll never see me do a book haul video on this channel. Not that I think there's some toxic consumerists, blah, 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 blah. I don't go in for all that. But for me personally, I buy books all the time, and I'm not exactly proud of amassing more books than I can possibly read. I've seen some booktubers talk about how they only want to buy one book for every one book that they read, and they have to impose rules upon themselves in order to prevent runaway amassing of books. It is so easy to let your book collection just run completely wild. And I'm actually really nervous about standing here. This is just a straight drop into the water. It's about 10 feet straight down right here. And it's just like, woo, right there. The point is, I need to learn to accept the fact that I am going to die before I can read every single book that I want to read. Ooh, I don't want to admit it. I don't want to admit it. No, I don't want to admit that. One more bad habit I want to talk about before I start wrapping this up is a long-term bad habit of mine. And that's the habit of not reading a book because of its length. Now, this bad habit started developing when I started using Goodreads to track my books. It wasn't the tracking that did it, but Goodreads asks you to set a reading goal every year. And so I started setting a goal, whether it was 20 books or 50 books or whatever it was when I first started. I started making decisions whether or not to read a book based on how much time I thought I had left in the year. And if a book was too long, I wouldn't read it. And now with this channel, this bad habit is only starting to get worse because I've got a video production schedule of trying to get a video out every week, and that usually includes doing a book review. And I'll be damned if I'm going to keep making decisions on whether or not to read a book based on how long it is. At least not in the context of how much time I feel like I have to read based on how much time is left in the year. That's an arbitrary start and stop date, January to December. Who cares about any of that? Apparently I do. Apparently I care. But this is a reading habit that I want to completely eradicate. So the question is, if I cut out that part of me that likes to brag about how many books I've read, what becomes of my reading ambition? What does it look like then? So where does that leave me? So I've been thinking about this a lot for the last couple of weeks. And in that time, my reading has slowed to a trickle. And it's actually been kind of a relief to slow down on the reading. In fact, I've stopped listening to audiobooks entirely, and I started listening to more music. I've been listening to a lot of stuff that I haven't listened to, sometimes in some cases, decades. And I've listened to some new stuff, and I've just been rekindling my love for music. And this has just been a wonderful way to spend my time in the car and cleaning up in the house. And times that I would normally be listening to audiobooks, I'm just vibing to my tunes now. So at least for a little while, no more audiobooks. This isn't a permanent thing, but it will be a temporary thing. The other thing is I'm going to try to reduce the number of books that I read to about 3. A physical book, maybe 2 physical books, and maybe an ebook on my phone. But honestly, if I can keep it to 1 book at a time, at least for now, that would be great. There's definitely an advantage to reading multiple books at a time, which is why I've always advocated for doing that. And I'm usually able to differentiate the books in my head and keep them all straight. Keeping 24 books straight in my head is a bit of a challenge, but keeping 2, 3, or 4 books straight in my head isn't that big of a deal. But that's really not the issue here. The issue is being able to focus on one thing, being able to enjoy it from beginning to end, and move on from one thing to the next. Also, my video production schedule, traditionally YouTubers try to put out 1 video per week, and that sounds great. That's all well and good. And if I can keep up with that, I will. But if it turns out that I can't, because I'm not reading the kinds of books I want to do videos on, then I'm just not going to do a video. And that's going to have to be okay. And I know I don't think anybody's going to give me a hard time about it. It's all going to be coming from me. So this isn't a criticism. This isn't anything directed at anybody else. This is something that I'm doing for myself. I'm telling myself that it's okay not to do a video, but I'm telling you that I'm telling myself that it's not okay. You see what I'm doing here? This is a pep talk for myself that I'm doing publicly. The other thing is that I'm going to stop worrying about my reading goals, at least as far as a numerical reading goal. Instead of trying to get through X amount of books per year or per month, I want to focus on just trying to read 60 minutes a day. That's not really a lot for me. If I just give myself a manageable number of minutes to read per day, that's something that I can accomplish, and I can feel good about that. But also, I'm giving myself permission not to read at all. At least for now. For a little while, I'm taking a little bit of a break. And in fact, I've actually worked ahead on this channel. So I've got several weeks worth of videos already uploaded, and they're just waiting to release every Saturday. So I've got about a month before I need to start worrying about coming up with another video. And that's going to give me time to take a break and reassess everything. And in fact, what I'm going to do for a little while when I'm not reading is I'm going to play Bloons TD6. I've played all of the other Bloons games, and I tell you what, I absolutely love this tower defense game. And the 6th one is out. It's been out for a while. I haven't played it yet. My son is way into it, and he's been begging me to play it. So I'm going to start playing Bloons TD6, and I'm going to get good. I'm really looking forward to doing something with my time that isn't reading, at least on a temporary basis. And finally, when I do pick up a book again and I start reading, it's going to be with physical books, at least for now. And the goal there is to be spending more time with each book that I'm reading, not to fly through them. I want to take better notes on the books. I want to read associated works. I want to, look stuff up. I want to look up author interviews and just make a better study of all these books. Can you hear these frogs? That's pretty cool. And I'm not going to worry about how long a book is or how short a book is or how difficult, because I'm not going to worry about how many books I'm reading, so it's not going to matter how long it takes me to get through it, because I'm not worried about how long it's going to be between videos that I'm producing. The whole toxic productivity culture that I've been consuming recently on YouTube has really gotten to me. I didn't realize that it was, and so I'm really going to detox from all of that and just take it easy. I'm going to do this on my own terms. I got into making book reviews because I thought this was going to fit in naturally with my interests. This isn't something that I wanted to add stress to my life, for God's sake. So the last thing I want is for this channel, this venture, to blow up in my face and for it to ruin one of my favorite hobbies. So I'm not going to let that happen. Anyway, I know a lot of this flies in the face of a lot of things we're hearing on YouTube about how to read more books and how to read 100 books in a year, right? But don't let anybody tell you how to read your books, okay? You read your books, you read at your own pace. Ooh, spooky tunnel. If I only read 12 books in a year, 1 book a month, but I made a study of those books and they meant something to me, and I felt really good about each one of those books. How could that not be a good year of reading? Who cares if it's only 12 books? What if it was 2 books? If I really enjoyed those books and got a lot out of them, if I maximized my time with those books and really enjoyed them, who cares if it's only 2? Who cares? It doesn't matter. There's a bunch of ducks over here. Anyway, my phone's about to die. I'm down to about 5%. So I've got an Instagram channel. It's called Gronsky Books. You can go over there and keep up with the books that I'm currently reading, make book recommendations for me. I'd love to check them out. And go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you like what you're seeing. More videos to come, and until next time, I'll see you later. My feet are all wet from walking around the soggy soil at the lakeside, so now I have to walk all the way back to the car with wet, muddy socks.